Welcome to a new Node-RED tutorial on my channel, and today I want to talk about how you work with messages within Node-RED, and what about the message and some important things that you need to know about the message. And of course, when you start working with Node-RED, I think that how you deal with messages and how messages are triggered and travel around in your flow is self-explanatory. And yeah, I mean, there is nothing a lot about it. But then there is a lot of small nuances that you probably wouldn't figure out by yourself, and I would like to draw your attention to some of these in this video. I want to talk about quite a few things today, and I'm pretty sure that I'm not going to cover everything which is related to messages, but when I was thinking about how I use Node-RED in the past couple of years, these were the most things that I use on a daily basis, and maybe small things that have caught me off guard a couple of times in the past. So I think in the beginning I'm just going to talk about what is a message and how it looks like and what are the main parts of the message, just to make sure that we are on the same page. And then I also want to talk about splitting messages and how you can control how messages goes in your flow. And also want to talk about some of the split and join nodes in Node-RED, and also whilst we are going through some scenarios, then also talk about the switch and the change. And I think these are the basic message manipulation nodes when you just want to use standard Node-RED nodes and not anything which is like a function node. And I also want to talk about how I store information in the message. And this also goes back to how, what is the fundamentals of Node-RED, how nodes are supposed to, process messages that are going through. And this is something that I also alluded in my previous video when I talked about, storing information in the context. There was a section of don't do's, and actually I was talking about this scenario in that section. So this is a good refresher for that one. And once we go through all of these, I want to focus on the function nodes, because this is where you can do most of the the extra logic and manipulation of the messages. So here also there is a lot of things that you can do, but I just want to focus on a couple of things again that I most commonly use. So how you can control your various outputs, how you can send async messages, how you can send multiple messages either on one single output or on multiple outputs. Okay, I think we should start with the basics. And when I talk about the basics, I mean like really basics, just to make sure that we understand the whole thing. Because once you start working with Node-RED and then you enjoy these boxes and then putting wires together, sometimes you forget about really understanding the basics, because even if you don't understand, you can still do quite a lot in Node-RED. So that's, I think, the really appealing part of it. So when we're talking about message, it's usually represented with MSG in most of the code and on the screen that you see. So when I talk about message and the MSG, they are the same thing. And the message is basically an object, and then that object has let's say it has two distinct parts or two important parts. One is the payload, which is actually a mandatory part of the message, and the other one is the topic. And I mean, you can think this about like an email, that you have a email body where you have whatever you want to say, that's the actual content, and you have a topic which is like a subject where, I mean, you can use the subject to decide whether this is something that you're interested on or whether this is something else. So it basically tells you what's going to be in the payload. There is no real restriction on any of these. I mean, it's an object, so either the payload can be just a number or a boolean, or it can be an array, or it can be an object, or it can be anything. And basically the same applies to the topic, but in the topic we usually just put some string data, so nothing else. So whenever you are creating an inject node, by default, it sets the payload to timestamp and the topic to nothing. But these are the two main elements. So you can just set them to anything that you want. And of course, you can always add anything to the message that you want. I mean, you have seen plenty of times that I can, I was putting like a complex object in the payload, so you can, put a lot of information in the email. In the payload, but then you know, there is the whole message object as well, and then you can put anything that you want in it. So I can, you know, create another property of the message object, like message.text, and then, you know, put like hello world in it, and you know, that's absolutely fine. And if I deploy the changes and I inject, then we can see that we have a message which has a payload, which is a number because the timestamp is a number. And of course, I haven't specified the topic here, so I can just put my topic. Let's just change that, because then we can see this thing in the debug as well. So you can see that my topic is shown here. So that's the topic, and the payload is, it also tells you what the type of the payload is, which is really, really good. But also, you probably noticed that also the color indicates the type of the payload as well. So it is really easy to see if something is coming as a string or a number, which looks like a string, or it's a real number or object or something else. But also on the debug node, when you just place a debug node, it's only going to show you the payload, because this is what we're mostly interested in. But you can also tell the debug node to show you the complete message object, or just part of the message if you are only interested in, you know, certain parts of it. So if I do this now, and then now we can see that we have a message, which is an object, as I said. It has a payload, but it also has a message ID, which is something internal to Node-RED, which probably just helps to, you know, organize the message, or I don't know, manage the number of messages. So, and you can see that it has a topic, which is a string, which says my topic, and it also has an attribute or property, which is called the test, and the value is hello world. So this is what we have specified here. So always keep this in mind, that message is an object, the payload is a property, topic is a property, but it can have a lot of other things as well. And when you are wiring nodes in Node-RED, you are not restricted to just basically connect one thing to another. You can also create multiple wires. From one port, you can, you know, link to multiple, you know, other nodes, and that just means that you are duplicating your messages. So whenever I click on this timestamp, or sorry, this inject node, then the information is going to go out from this port, and it's going to go into the debug, but it's also going to the delay node. So from this single message that I send out, it actually is going to go into, well, duplicate itself, because on each wire the message is going to be sent out. So if I do this now, you can see that the first message going through the debug node straight away, the other is now in the delay node, and then it just got delayed by 5 seconds, and then it has gone into the to the debug node as well. So whenever you are splitting like this, then you are just duplicating messages, and of course there is you know, no reason why you cannot join them again, and then, you know, then all of the messages end up in, well, in this example, in the debug node. So just make sure that you understand that if you create a split in your wiring, then you multiply the message as well. You basically create a copy. And since we are talking about like splitting and joining, I want to talk about these split and join nodes, which you can see here. And where is it? It must be here somewhere by the color. Yeah, it's under sequence. So the reason so they are here. If you have seen a lot of my videos, I don't think that you have seen me using the split and the join a lot of times, because quite honestly, it implements things that I like to do in JavaScript, because I think I just have a little bit more control over this functionality in JavaScript. But actually they are very useful ones, and especially if you are starting in Node-RED and you just prefer to use more nodes so you can see what is happening, this is really a great node. If you look at this node and you go into the properties, you can actually see that it is designed to handle different data types separately. So, for example, if you send in a big string, for example, if you have a file, and then if you send that file in as a string, then you can ask it to split that file in every single line. So you can see that the split criteria is \n which is a new line. But you can put in any value, and this is very similar how you can split a string in JavaScript as well. You can just specify like a delimiter. It can be like, you can just use comma, semicolon, like any delimiter. And then what it will do, it will create multiple messages and then basically split them by those delimiter. But if you send in an array, you can also ask it to split each element in an array into a separate message, because maybe these elements are the same and you just want to process them one by one instead of processing it as a big array. Or if you send in an object, you can also ask it to split it by properties. And I think the string one is probably more self-explanatory, and I cannot really think about an example how I would use it. So I just created an array and an object example for you. So what is happening here is I'm sending an array, and I'm sending this simple array in, an array which contains object, and each of the object has an OP1, OP2, so operand 1, operand 2 property. So it's basically two numbers. And what I'm going to ask the split is just to split. I mean, if it gets an array, it's going to split it by every single element in an array. So it's going to be multiple messages. And I pass it to a change node, which is going to say that I want to set the message.payload.sum to the OP1 plus OP2. So basically I just add the two values together. So I create a sum. And I also create a product, which is the, multiply operand 1 and operand 2. And then at the end, I just want to join them together. And then you can do a lot of different joining here. So you can play around with this. There is a lot of options here. Normally, if you have a split and then you want to rejoin it, then I just suggested to leave it on automatic. But if you leave it on manual, you can see that there is a lot of things that you can do. So for example, you can say that join every 5 messages together again, or you can join into based on some sequence numbers, or you can just keep joining messages until and wait, or joining them together until you have like a certain seconds timeout in the in the number of messages that you receive, or you are going to join messages together until you receive a message.complete property. But as I said, in most cases, well, if you are using them with splitting, then you just leave it on automatic. So let's see what is happening here. So I'm going to send this array in. We are going to see how it got split together after the split, and then at the end we will see how it gets joined together again. So now what we can see is that I set up this debug node, so it shows the complete message. So the first 3 messages are coming from this. So you can see that the payload is, as I said, a single element of the array. So it shows the first one where the OP1 is 10 and the OP2 is 20. And the reason I set up this debug node to show the complete message, because this split also creates this parts object. And this parts object says that this was an array, it had 3 elements, and this is the first element in the array. And this part object is actually what the join looks at in order to know how to rejoin the object again once all the messages have come in. So this is why it has the count, because then it knows that it needs to wait for 3 messages to put the original message back together. And then of course on the second one we get the other 2 operators or operands, so 5 and 3, and then here the the part index is now 1, and for the last message the 4 and 75, and the parts count is 2, so 0, 1 and 2. And then finally, when everything is joined together, then we got our array back, which has 3 objects, because originally it had 3, it got split to 3 different messages, and now they are recombined to an array. And this time we have the 2 extra properties that we have created here and here as well. So now for each of these objects, besides the the first and the second value, we also get the sum and the product. So you can see 8 and 15, and for the last one, it's going to be 79 and 300. So again, if you have especially an array and all the elements are going to be the same, you want to process all of them. Of course, I would usually do all of these in a function node using a for loop, but you can just use standard nodes for that. It's going to be a lot more visible, especially if you are starting. So I think this is, it's nice. The other thing I wanted to show you is how you can also split this the message. Let's say, again, I haven't specified here. All I said that, well, I know that I'm going to send an object, and I'm telling it to, split the object by the key value pair, and then I copy the key into the message.topic. So I want to send in a data which, let's say I am receiving from a temperature and humidity sensor over MQTT, and this sends the data in JSON format. And of course, let's assume that I need the temperature and the humidity separately. And of course, I can reference this as, for example, message.payload.temperature or message.payload.humidity. But let's do this with the split node. So this is going to split my message based on the various keys or various attributes in the object. And here I just created a simple switch node which says if the topic is temperature, then the data goes on the first port, and if it's humidity, on the second port. So I can just split the data from the main object. So if I execute this, the first, after the split, we get the first and the second data. So you can see that I got the temperature of 25, and then the temperature has gone into the topic, and the humidity is 60, and the word humidity has gone into the topic. And then now you can see that the temperature came out through this port, and the humidity came out from this port. So again, you can put it onto your dashboard, or I don't know, store the information. So this is how you would use this split node to split an array. So my next example refers back right in the beginning when we said that we not only just have a payload and a topic in our message, but we can have any other property. And it is important because we can use any of these properties to store information in the message, especially if we have a long flow which goes through a lot of different nodes, and we have some data in the beginning that we want to use at the end. And then when I made a video about the context, I said if you need this kind of storage, it's using the context is not a good idea, because in the context you cannot guarantee that the context doesn't get overwritten if you are getting very frequent data. In that case, you actually have to use the message to store the information in the message itself. And the de facto standard in Node-RED is that every node should really use the payload to receive all the data that it needs, and also it should put all the data that it processes into the payload. And that works for a lot of nodes, but of course there are some nodes, well, there are quite a few nodes which use other properties in the message as well. I mean, we have already seen how the split and the join nodes use the parts object, message.parts, to store information which gets used. Well, it's an information which is generated by the split node, and it's used by the join node later on. And we could use the same concept to store information. So for example, what I'm going to have here is that I have an inject node which is going to inject, let's say, a file name. So this is, I want to create this file. But then, first of all, I want to, let's say, read a file which is on the hard drive, and maybe I use that information and save it into a different file or something like that. So when you use the file read node and you specify the the file that you want to read, of course it puts the file content into the message.payload, because that's the primary output for every single node. So whatever you put in the message.payload here, it's going to get overwritten here. So you won't have access to this information after the file in node. well, you won't have access to that information in the payload, but you would have access to that information within any other object of the message, or of the main message object, sorry, any other property of the main message object. So what we can do is we can put this payload where the new file name comes in, and we can put it into the message.new file name. And then, of course, when you send this message to the file in node, then of course that file in node is only going to change the payload. It's not going to touch the rest of the message object. So when I do this, what we are going to see here, by the way, this debug node is also set up to show the complete message object, is that we have a message ID, of course we have a payload, and this is actually the content of the file name. So this meflora.json that we read, and well, we didn't have a topic, and we actually have a file name. So even the file in node has created a new property in the message where it stores the file name that we have already specified here. But of course, you can use the same property as well to send in the file name to the file in node if you don't want to specify it in the editor. But regardless, what we are really interested in is that the new file name property that we have created here is not getting changed, it's just getting passed through. So again, as I said, each node mostly changes the payload. It can use other properties as well. But of course, if you define a property which is not used by any of the other nodes, it would just get passed through the whole flow, and then you can just access it at any point within your flow. Of course, you know, within the same message. But that's the whole idea. So this is how you save information and then pass that information down on your flow. And with this, we reach the section where I'm going to talk about the function nodes and where, you know, most of the manipulation happens. First, let me just, you know, open a really empty function node. So when you create a new function node, then this is how it looks like. It doesn't have anything else. It just says return a message, because when you execute, well, when this function node gets executed, because a message comes in, the message is going to store in message MSG, and you know, if you don't do anything with it, you just pass it on to the output. So this function node is not going to do anything. Whatever comes in, it goes out on the output. And of course, if I execute this, probably it's not going to be a surprise that I inject the timestamp here and the timestamp appears here as well, because the function node doesn't do anything. And of course, I can, you know, specify, like if I want I can specify my data here as well. So you know, in the return, I just ignore completely what comes on the output. I just want to send something out on I ignore what comes in the input, because maybe I processed the information. So I just want my message to be sent out on the output. And of course, you can just, you know, maybe you would create this information somewhere in the function node and put it into a variable, and then you just say at the end, you know, return my data. So of course, it doesn't have to be the MSG that you return. So just test this. Of course, it works. So again, the reason I wanted to share this is just remember that whenever you are sending something out from a function node, it should be an object which has at least a payload property, because you know, otherwise Node-RED would not work exactly the way you want. And I've gone through this rabbit hole down, and then it took me, I don't know, like a couple of hours to figure out that I didn't have a payload in the data that I was trying to send out. So this is why I wanted to spend the extra time to explain this. Okay, so that was all about the, you know, the empty message and everything in it. So let me show you something else. This is another function node, and what I just wanted to show you here is that you don't necessarily have to end your function. Well, obviously you don't have to end your function node with you know, the return MSG or a return with any data, because maybe you have a function node which does not always necessarily have to return the data. So I have a lot of function nodes which information comes in and then it processes the information, like, you know, what was the last time the data was received. But I also have to have another source, like another data, for example, an inject node, which is executed every second, which usually have, for example, a different topic, or it has a different payload, and that is only used to like process the data, maybe show something in the status node. So what is happening here is that I have two inject nodes, and both of them are sending a different type of topic. So this one says update, and this one sends new data. And if I send a new data, then the data comes out from the function node and it says, you know, data is received, and I can do it as many times as I want and it just works. If I send update, it just says update received, and then the data is not getting passed because, let's say, it's just an update, it's not a real data that needs to be processed further. And you can do that without any issues. So, you know, if the message is if the message.topic is update, then we, you know, set a status node like, okay, update received, and we do return null. So this is how the execution of the function is going to end, and you return nothing. And that just means that nothing appears on the output of this node. And if the topic is new data, then you show a green ring and data is received, and just return the message. So again, as I said, it doesn't have to be, it can be a return null if you don't want to send out the particular message. Also, what you can do as well is you can use the, I mean, it's not really messages, but you can use the function to send you some warnings as well. And actually, not only warnings, so as you can see, I have this comment here which says node.warn, this is not good. So I usually use this if I'm really desperate and I've completely lost in my function node, and because obviously you can debug it. So you can use this node.warn to send some debugging information to your output so you know what is happening in the node. And actually you can do node.log and warn and error as well. The only reason I like to use the warn because it comes up with a different color here, so it's much easier to see it from errors and the general debug messages. So this is something that you can just do, you know, maybe for yourself, or really, you know, just for debugging. And then, you know, if everything is working, you just comment out these lines. But again, it just appears in this debug node. And it is not really how you process messages, or how you process messages, but it's more about like, giving you feedback. Next one is async output. And if I just execute this, again, timestamp goes in and then something goes out. And you can see that it behaves just like any of the other nodes, well, like this empty function node. So the data goes in and the data goes out, nothing special. But if I keep pressing this inject node, so what is happening now is I've created a node which sends out the output, but if this number is an even number, it also sends out another message which says even. So you can see these are odd, and okay, this is an even number. And maybe this is not the best example that you can do, but you can also use this function which says node.send, and then you specify your object, which could be message or it could be anything. And this is used to send out the message while you are still running through your function node. So you can see that, you know, when I send this node.send, the execution of the function node doesn't stop because obviously this is not a return. So then it still continues and it still hits the return message at the end. So this is why I'm getting actually two messages out from these. And we are going to see later on that you can send multiple messages out from the from a function node at the end, or whenever you specify return. But if for any reason you want to send messages in the middle of the processing, you can use the node.send. To be honest, from all the things I've done, I haven't really used this node.send. So I'm pretty sure it could be useful, but it's not something that I used probably not even once, as far as I can remember. And finally, with the last two options, I want to show you how you can send out multiple messages from a function node, or you can create how you create a function node which has multiple outputs. So you can see I have multiple ports here. So the first example here, I send in a simple timestamp, and I get actually 4 messages out. And I mean, the messages don't really make any sense, but this is just for just for the sake of testing it. So you can see here that obviously the message comes in, so I have the message as an object, and I've created 3 more, just basically random objects. So both of them has a topic and it has a payload. The actual content doesn't matter at this moment, but what I wanted to show you is that if you specify your return line like this with like a double nested array, and then you just specify your objects separated by comma, so it's like a double nested array, then these messages are going to be sent out one after each other on the, well, this has only one output, so on the the first port. And you can see that the message goes out, and then the data 1, 2, and 3, which says first, second, and third, and first, second, and third. So this comes out. So again, if you want to, for any reason, or you want to send out multiple data, you can do it this way. To be honest, I'm not using this a lot, but it is certainly possible, and maybe you would need to use this this option in a scenario. What I use most is the second scenario, where I have multiple ports. So let's say you have a very complicated function node which does a lot of things, and then for example, it needs to send out data in multiple different formats. Then what you can do is you can use multiple outputs. So for example, in a good example of this is I have somewhere in one of my flows, I have a function node which creates like some sort of data. And then I use one port to send the data out. Let's say it creates an array inside, so it maintains some data. So I use one port to send all the data out. So in one single message, everything is sent out. And maybe I use a second port where I only send out the one which just got updated, or the one that got processed, maybe just a single entry from the array or single element from the array. And then maybe I use the third output to send out a special object which goes into a notification. So this is what I would use to show, like on a dashboard, show a message that new entry got created, or the entry got updated, or the entry got deleted. And of course, when, let's say, a new entry got created, the message goes out on the third port. On the first port, all the entries go out in a single message, so I can store it in the context, save it in a file, whatever. And then on the second port, only the new data goes out, so I can, I don't know, show it on the screen. Or maybe send it out for further processing. So I have 3 inject nodes, and they all send in a number 1, 2, 3 in the payload. And then depending on whether it's 1, 2, and 3, it comes out on the first, second, and the third port. It's a very simple example. I mean, you can do this with a switch node as well, but it's, it's not about the data, it's all about the principle. So let me show you how it works. So if I send 1, it comes out of debug 51, and the 2 comes out of debug 52, and the 3 comes out of debug 53. So as I mentioned. And so that's how it looks like. Well, the real thing is actually here at the end, and you see it almost looks like how we send out the data in the previous one, but in the previous example, when we are sending out multiple data on a single port, it was in it was in a double nested array, but here we just return the 3 objects in a single array. And then Node-RED knows that this port has 3 outputs, so it's going to send out the first one on the first output, the second one, the second one, the third output. And what I like to do in this case is make sure that I'm sending out the same number of objects as the number of outputs of the function node. I don't think it's necessarily. I don't think it's necessary. It probably is going to work fine if you just return a single object. It's just going to go out on the first output. But I think it just makes it a little bit neater, and I always know, how it's going to work. And what I also like to do is I would create the let's say in my case 3 objects, because there is 3 output in the beginning of the code, and set them to null, because then if, for example, I don't want to send something out on the second or the third port, I can just leave the data on null, and then, for example, if I say return port 1 null null, then port 1 goes out on the first output, and on the second and third output nothing goes out. So I can control that I only want to send data on the first or second or third, or the first and the second or third, or all 3 of them, or none of them. So you can see here that in the beginning of the code, all the 3 values are null. And then based on the message.payload, if it's 1, then I put the message into the port 1 or port 2 or port 3. And then I just send out port 1 and 2 and 3, whether they have any data or they are null. And they work, this now works exactly as we expected. The first comes, number 1 comes out on the first port, second on the second, and third on the third port. So I think this whole concept of creating them as null just makes it a little bit neater, and it's just easier to follow the code what it's supposed to do. But of course, let's say if you have a scenario, I could do this by return message null, and I wouldn't even need the break, because then it will break anyway. Yeah, so I could do this, and then obviously for the wrong clipboard, null message. So this would yield exactly the same result as the one above, because then the message goes on the first, second, and the third port, and all the other ports we are just sending null, so nothing. And I wouldn't even need the return at the end, because well, if I only assume that I have numbers 1, 2, and 3, then it will cover all 3 cases anyway. So ideally, it would never come to this part of the code, but this would work exactly the same way as the code above. So you can just decide which one, which format you want to use, and you just make sure that you cover all the different scenarios. I'm really happy that you managed to stay for this long right at the end of the video. So let's just recap what we have done today, or what we learned today. So first of all, we learned the fundamentals of the messages in Node-RED. We also gone through how you can change messages using the standard nodes. And of course, later on we talked about the function nodes in more detail. We talked about the splitting and the joining messages, which can be, one way how you can split complex messages like arrays or objects, and then process the individual pieces separately. And then finally, in most of the part, we talked about the function nodes, because I think this is where most of the magic happens with the message. So like, async out messages, sending warnings, handling multiple outputs, and some interesting quirks along those lines. I think that will be all I wanted to share about messages in Node-RED. I really hope that you learned something new today. But that will be all for now. Thanks for watching, and hopefully see you next video.